But $60,000 is a lot of money for school.
Yeah. Yep.
I appreciate it.
Good afternoon. We will be commencing the webinar at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay. I didn't think I was hearing anything on this here. On the other side, I guess. Oh,
So I mean, just look past it right there. It's right in the middle.
So is the webinar live?
The broadcast is now
Oh, there it
starting.
is.
All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So thank you, everybody, for being with us today. Good afternoon. My name's Fields Mosley. I'm the Communications Director here at Maricopa County. I'm also the lead PIO in our Unified Command structure, leading the Joint Information Center at this time for Maricopa County. I want to welcome you, welcome all the reporters that are on the live feed, as well as those of you joining us on the webinar to ask some questions today and hear what we have to say about the subject of fatality management. Sadly, it is a reality whenever we're talking about a pandemic and the spread of disease in our community, and it's something that a lot of our professionals here at the county deal with all the time. It's part of their daily job at the medical examiner's office, but it's become very noticeable, of course, during this pandemic. Over the last, I was asked a direct question yesterday, responded to that with the current numbers and the current capacity at the medical examiner's office in the coolers there. We don't consider the medical examiner's office a morgue. We'll go into that a little bit more in just a second. But we have received a lot of questions about quote-unquote morgue capacity. And so we want to be able to answer some of those today, talk a little bit about the role of the Office of the Medical Examiner, how it fits into the entire system of fatality management within our community, and of course in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Also with me today, I have the Director of Emergency Management, Robert Rowley. He is with us to talk a little bit about how the Unified Command set up a plan just in case we needed portable coolers at some point during this pandemic. He will talk a little bit more about that plan and how we are now executing on that plan in order to be prepared for more bodies if that is the case, and how to deal with those and support the community at large. Also, Public Health Executive Director Marcy Flanagan is going to talk about the trends we're seeing in the COVID-19 data from the public health side and what our community can expect to see as a result of the widespread disease in our community. So, a few housekeeping items that I go through at the start of every one of these. Members of the media that are on there on the webinar, the GoToWebinar, you need to unmute your microphone and raise your hand so we can then call on you to ask a question. Chad Amos is on the line. He will notify you that your mic is open. He'll open your mic. You ask your question. Please limit it to 1 or 1.5 if you can. We always try to get back around to second and third questions at the end of this, and we know there's a lot of interest today, so let's try to limit it to one question. I'm sure somebody else will ask the second question you're thinking about at the time. If you're having some difficulty getting through, I would invite you to log out of GoToWebinar, log back in, just to make sure you get in there, because sometimes the raising the hand part, you'll click on it, it won't work. So we can't fix that on our end, but we certainly want to make sure we get to your questions if you have them today. So before we get to Robert and Marcy, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Medical Examiner's Office. The Office of the Maricopa County Office of the Medical Examiner is the official title of our Medical Examiner's Office. We do not have a coroner in Maricopa County. We have a medical examiner's office. Our chief medical examiner is Dr. Jeffrey Johnston. He leads a team of pathologists, and they do science, and they study the cause of death of a number of people in our community, but not everybody in our community every single year. They perform medical investigations of sudden, unexpected, and violent deaths. And it's very important to understand that is their jurisdiction. That accounts for about 20% of the deaths we see in our county each year. So once an examination is complete, the body is then released to the family. What that generally means is the funeral home comes and picks up a body and takes it to the funeral home so they can provide those necessary services to the family during their time of need, and so they can say goodbye to a loved one. And that whole effort is called disposition. So in the context of COVID-19, because of that limited jurisdiction for the Office of the Medical Examiner, very, very few cases of COVID-19 deaths have come to the Office of the Medical Examiner. It is just most people who are dying are in the care of a physician, or they are at a hospital, and those medical facilities are then taking care of those needs and then moving the bodies on out of their morgues and on to a funeral home within this larger system. So let's talk a little bit about capacity, because this has been the big headline, right, since Friday and then again this week after I was asked that question of ABC 15 yesterday. The Medical Examiner's Office has a normal space for 150 bodies. And once we exceed 150 bodies, we consider it's not an arbitrary number. That's a time like, hey, we need to start talking about what our capacity is and what it could be. Obviously, we know in terms of COVID-19, we're in a different situation than we would be in a normal summer, but we have hit surge capacity before because of heat-related deaths this time of year. So this is not unheard of, but it hasn't made a headline before. So they can use portable racks to extend that capacity from 150 up to 209 bodies in our coolers that are on site in the Forensic Science Center that is in downtown Phoenix. So we have a graphic that I can show you real quickly. It kind of demonstrates the capacity track that we saw over the last week. Because we were asked a lot of questions on Friday at what our capacity was. It was at 145 bodies at that time, which was approximately 96% of our capacity. So the trend line, though, over the weekend, all of a sudden we got a number of bodies that came into the medical examiner's office, and we crossed that 150 threshold. And then by Monday, it went up again. So I was asked yesterday about this, and Public Health and the Office of the Medical Examiner, they have relationships with funeral homes, and they were able to make phone calls to funeral homes and start talking to them about, hey, we need you to come and pick up these bodies and take care of these for families and move them to your storage capacity at these funeral homes. This is a normal process, and it's part of the larger system. So they also... The funeral homes, of course, are a very important part of this. In fact, they're the critical part of this system whenever it comes to making sure the people who have passed away are taken care of within our community. So we needed to find out where the challenges existed within that system. That was the reason for the phone calls that were made to these. Today, I'm happy to report we're at 132 bodies as of this morning. That's a big difference, right, from the 181 we were at on Monday. So that's not to say we might not cross 150 today or tomorrow. This is a 24/7 operation that happens with our Office of Medical Examiner, and the numbers change by the hour, and especially it seems to change more on the weekends. That's something we see. So just because we are in a better place today doesn't mean we'll be in a different place tomorrow. So we're going to talk in a moment. I'll Robert Rowley talk about the capacity, the coolers that have been put into play just in case we need them. But first, I want to introduce you to the Executive Director of Maricopa County Department of Public Health, Marcy Flanagan, and she can talk a little bit more about these trends and the data we're seeing and what this means for our community and what our community can do to take some action during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Marcy?
Good afternoon. I'm Marcy Flanagan, Executive Director of Maricopa County Department of Public Health. So when we look at the data, we know that we start to see certain patterns with diseases. And we've talked about how we would expect to see a decline in our cases as mitigation strategies are put into place, like wearing a face mask and limiting social gatherings and social distancing. Another pattern that we know is that as cases increase and decrease, about 2 weeks after that, we're going to see an increase and decrease in hospitalizations according to what those cases did. And then subsequently, we're going to see an increase and decrease in deaths associated with those cases, 2 weeks to 3 weeks after the hospitalization rates. And this is really because individuals with COVID-19 especially tend to spend a few weeks in the hospital before they pass away from COVID-19. It's not in every case, but it's very typical. That means, given that the numbers we saw a couple of weeks ago, we are likely, unfortunately, to see the trends of deaths continue to rise over the next 2 to 3 weeks. So we know that a couple of weeks ago that our cases were averaging just over 3,000 a day. Luckily, for the last 7 days, our average is now at 2,200. So this is in the right direction, but it's not low enough. Each of us has the ability to help prevent those hospitalizations and deaths and keep us moving in the right direction. This is why we repeat so often to please wear a mask when you're out in public, social distance whenever possible, and and they work. They take time, and it takes a few weeks for us to see these changes in our numbers. So give it time and continue to do all these preventative and mitigation efforts that we ask you from public health. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert Rowley, who's going to talk about our planning.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Rowley, and I'm the Director for the Maricopa County Department of Emergency Management. A fundamental part of emergency management is proactive planning. Since March, the Maricopa County COVID-19 Unified Command has been proactively planning for multiple facets of this pandemic, including supporting the provision of care for our most vulnerable, particularly the procurement and distribution of personal protective equipment. In this same way, the Unified Command has been actively planning for a rapid expansion of decedent storage for the Office of Medical Examiner, should this become necessary. On Monday of this week, when it appeared there was the potential for the Office of Medical Examiner to exceed their maximum storage capability, the Unified Command put these plans immediately into effect. As of yesterday afternoon, 4 portable coolers have been acquired and put into operation, which will expand decedent storage capacity by an additional 84. We expect to have another 4 portable coolers put into operation by the end of the day tomorrow, which will further expand additional storage to a total of 168. By next week, 6 more coolers will be added. This will bring the total number of portable coolers to 14, which will expand total additional storage beyond what the OME can surge to a capacity of 294. Currently, none of these portable coolers are being used, but they are operational and standing by if needed. The ability to rapidly expand our emergency decedent storage has put Maricopa County ahead of the planning curve. The Unified Command continues to monitor the situation closely, and planning efforts are now underway to further expand our storage capability if needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcy and Robert, for that. At this point, we'll open it up to questions from members of the media who are on the webinar today. Chad, do we have anybody on the line?
We do. Evan McMorris-Santoro has a question. Evan, your microphone is live.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking questions, and thanks for having this webinar. Can you just tell me first what impact COVID has had on your office? And secondly, you're adding a lot of capacity. It doesn't sound like great news.
So what impact it's had on the Office of the Medical Examiner is what you're asking?
That's right, but then
Okay.
also explain why you're adding so much extra capacity.
Sure. So we're not always. So the Office of the Medical Examiner does the investigations to determine what caused somebody's death. Correct. And so, yes, it's had. It's unclear right now if COVID-19 is having this, but we have had a larger number of decedents come into the medical examiner's office. So far, the numbers of COVID-19 related cases are relatively low compared to our complete numbers that we have. So the larger number of the increase in the number of deaths overall in our county, that has had an impact on the medical examiner's office to some extent. And I believe Rob can expand on that a little bit as far as being prepared and why we should be prepared to this level.
Yes, thank you, Fields. So it's important to understand that adding additional capacity is a complex process. It isn't just simply acquiring the coolers. The proper location has to be found. We have to make sure that the coolers are available. These are coming from a private vendor. We also have to make sure that we have the power installed and that we have backup power capability for these coolers. And so all of this increases the lead time for when these coolers can be put into operation and be ready to be used if needed. So over the weekend, when we saw that the medical examiner's office was approaching their maximum surge capability, it was decided at that point just to play it safe and to implement our plans that we already had in place and get these coolers put into position and ready to be operational if needed, so that there wouldn't be any delay and that capability would be there for us should it be necessary. Currently, it is not necessary. They aren't needed, but they're ready to go if they are. We consider that prudent planning given the current situation.
La pregunta es, ¿qué impacto ha tenido COVID-19 en la oficina del médico forense? Y hay dos preguntas, ¿y por qué añadir tanta capacidad a este punto? La respuesta de la número uno, el médico forense hace investigaciones de todo tipo de investigaciones de los cuerpos. Hasta ahora, las muertes por COVID-19 han sido bajas en cuestión de lo que viene siendo el médico forense en las investigaciones, pero ese número de muertes en total han estado subiendo y por eso hay que estar preparado. La parte dos de la pregunta, ¿por qué añadir tanta capacidad? Bueno, el tener más capacidad es una situación compleja. ¿Por qué? Porque hay que buscar sitios adecuados, buscar los refrigeradores adecuados, poner los contratos y que lleguen a su tiempo adecuado también cuando sean necesarios. También tener electricidad suficiente para abastecer esos refrigeradores. Este fin de semana vimos también muy de cerca que pudiera necesitarse ese tipo de refrigeradores por la situación que se vio con el número de casos en el médico forense. Sin embargo, no ha sido necesario utilizarlos hasta el momento. Entonces, solamente estamos preparados, estamos listos en caso de que llegara. Esto es una medida proactiva en caso de que se necesiten.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Joanna. I failed in announcing that Joanna Molina is with us today from Public Health. She's always with us, and I'm sorry, it seems funny to even announce my name after 20-plus press conferences. But Joanna Molina is a public information officer from Public Health, and she provides Spanish translation every time for our Spanish language stations that are out there, also following along with this story. And we certainly want to make sure they get important information to those in our community that are bilingual and Spanish-only speakers. So let's go ahead and go to the next question. Thanks for that question, or two questions.
The next question is from Jacques Belot. Jacques, your microphone is live.
Yes. Aside from the medical examiner's operation, are the hospitals and funeral homes in Maricopa County getting overloaded now in terms of seeing an increased number of proceedings? And if so, how expensive is that?
Thanks for the question, Jacques. We do check in with our hospitals from time to time. We have weekly, if not more often, calls. Marcy Flanagan is a part of some of those calls, and she can fill you a little bit more about that relationship with hospitals and medical providers here in the community and what they've been hearing from those partners.
Thank you for that question. So the important thing to know is that we do not oversee funeral homes or hospitals, so they're not required to report their capacity to public health. We can tell you what our hospital partners do report to us is their capability in their beds for inpatient, ED, and ICU. So you've heard us talk about those numbers and where they're at. But they do not report to us their morgue numbers and their status. So anecdotally, we've heard from some of our hospital partners that they are at or nearing their capacity. You heard earlier that Public Health did reach out to our funeral homes in the Valley to expand who was accepting bodies from our Office of Medical Examiner. Those were bodies that had already been examined and were ready for final disposition, and that happens through a funeral home. When we talked to these funeral homes, we did hear that many of them were at capacity and were not able to take additional bodies. So without knowing the entire picture of Maricopa County, because they do not report to us, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that all of the funeral homes are at capacity or nearing capacity, but certainly we did hear that from some as we reached out to them. Thank you.
La pregunta es que si hay hospitales que están llenos al momento Bueno, Salud Pública del Condado Maricopa es importante que se enteren que no, los hospitales, al igual que las casas funerarias, no tienen que reportar los números de capacidad en cuestión de morgue. Sin embargo, lo que sí se habla es acerca del equipo de protección personal, la capacidad que tienen para atender al personal, a las personas, a los pacientes. Algo también importante es que Salud Pública del Condado Maricopa se comunicó recientemente con algunas casas funerarias para saber si ya estaban listos para recoger los cuerpos que se habían acordado que recogieran, porque ya se había acordado con las familias. Pero no necesariamente las casas funerarias tienen que dar ningún tipo de daros información a Salud Pública, ni nosotros tampoco a ellos. Solamente fue una cortesía. Sabemos que algunas casas funerarias están llenas y algunas todavía tienen capacidad.
All right, thank you, Marcy. Thank you, Jacques, for the good question. Appreciate it. Who else do we have on the line, Chad?
Jessica Bohm is next. Jessica, your microphone is live.
Hi, Fields. So we've determined that the Office of the Medical Examiner doesn't take in many bodies of people who have died of COVID-19, but you've also said that the office has been impacted by the overall effects of COVID-19. Can you clarify what are those overarching impacts that are making it so that the capacity in the medical examiner's office is, further extended than normal?
Yeah, sure. Well, and most of it has to do with capacity, and I talked a little bit about the funeral home capacity at the very beginning. As Marcy just explained a moment ago, funeral homes are not required to share information with them or with us, and they are, and neither are hospitals. They are not licensed by the county, and we don't have regulatory authority over them. However, they are partners in this process, and they are an important part of the system. So I think Marcy can expand a little bit more on that, but certainly the medical examiner's office, as a part of the system, just like a hospital has storage areas, and if they are not able to move bodies along to those funeral homes, we are having those same storage capacity issues, or that's what we saw over the weekend, certainly, and we've solved those at least for the short term. So that goes to our surge capacity. I think Marcy can expand a little bit on that. Maybe? All right.
Hi, Jessica. I would just repeat what Field said, is that it's kind of like a domino effect. So when bodies come into our Office of Medical Examiner, those are bodies that qualify to need an autopsy, and they're released once the autopsy is complete. If there's nowhere to release them to, i.e. a funeral home, then that's when we have to start storing bodies longer than we're typically storing bodies at the medical examiner's office. So when the system has pressure on it, with the total throughput of, from when a person passes to their final disposition, and if there's anywhere in that process that there is pressure and it's being held up, that affects all of us. So if funeral homes are experiencing higher numbers than normal because of COVID, because of other issues, the heat-related illnesses, those sorts of things, and they're backed up, that just backs up the rest of the system. Thank you.
La pregunta es, si el médico forense no recoge cuerpos que han fallecido por COVID-19, personas que han fallecido por COVID-19, ¿cómo es que se ha visto impactado por los altos números de muertes están a su capacidad? Bueno, primero que nada hay que recordar que el condado no supervisa hospitales ni casas funerarias. También el médico forense tiene cierta capacidad y es cuando ya se está llenando que tiene que tomar algún tipo de cartas en el asunto. Y como mencionó anteriormente, también es un efecto dominó. Los cuerpos que llegan al médico forense son porque necesitan una autopsia. Una vez que se hace la investigación y que se da, ya está listo para recuperarse el cuerpo por la funeraria. Si la funeraria está llena, no tiene capacidad, entonces esos cuerpos se van quedando en la oficina del médico forense, añadiendo todavía mucho más el número de personas que han fallecido en la oficina del médico forense. Y eso es lo que ha estado sucediendo. Entonces ahorita se está añadiendo mucha más capacidad precisamente porque hay cuerpos que no se han recogido por las funerarias.
Thank you, Marcy. Thank you, Jessica, for the question. Chad, who do we have next?
Our next question is to Bram Resnick. Bram, you're self-muted. If you'll unmute your microphone, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Fields, and thank you for your response to my request this morning.
Of course.
So I think we have an answer there that basically the system is clogged by this surge of COVID deaths, which may not be arriving at the ME's office, but they're going to funeral homes, which are clogged, and this affects the whole system. Do I have that right?
I think that is certainly a part of it. Bram, I don't know if we're to the point where we know exactly the cause of death of every single death out there in the community. That is a kind of a lagging bit of information that we get later on during a pandemic or even during a regular year when we're tracking heat deaths so closely in our community. But we get that information later on. But considering considering the current circumstances, that would seem to make sense, yes. Bram, you sounded like you were going farther with that question, Bram, so I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, just a question. This question is kind of a reach, but I do wonder whether you have any insight to the number of deaths that have no family or others claiming the body. Would those end up at the ME's office as well?
Not necessarily, Bram, if people weren't claiming the body. Marcy, can you expand on that a little bit? Okay. Marcy has a little more knowledge than I do on that question. Bram, since it's your birthday, we'll have her answer that.
Hi, Bram. Happy birthday. So for the medical examiner, if someone doesn't claim a body, that does not go to our medical examiner. That would actually be a public fiduciary decedent if they cannot find who the family members are. And that process could take a little bit longer. However, because they're not reporting to us, the funeral homes, I wouldn't be able to share with you or tell you or give you a picture of if a lot of the bodies they have right now are in that category or not.
La pregunta es que si las muertes que no se han reclamado, los cuerpos de personas que han fallecido, se encuentran en el médico forense. Bueno, si alguien no reclama un cuerpo, no necesariamente va al médico forense, que no se reporta necesariamente a nosotros ni tampoco a las casas funerarias. Entonces, no tenemos números que puedan mostrar que esas personas que están ahí son porque no tiene nadie más que las reclame.
And Bram, a quick point of clarification: if a body that's not claimed by a family is unidentified, that would come to the medical examiner's office for identification and investigation. So that's a subset of the group you were asking about. But thanks so much for the question, and thank you, Marcy, for stepping in there as well. Chad, who do we have next with a question?
Mark Phillips has our next question. Okay. Mark, your microphone is live.
Hey, Fields. Mark Phillips here. Earlier, it was pointed out that you're going to nearly double in capacity by the end of next week at the medical examiner's office. My question is, can you give some sort of percentage of deaths by heat, deaths by violence, or sudden deaths that the medical examiner takes in, and COVID, and how that evolving ratio is affecting your office?
I don't have a percentage, Mark, but I can tell you it is little more than 100 cases that have been considered COVID-related that are either closed or they're still open at the medical examiner's office. This is since January. So in a 6-month time period, or a little bit more than that, the medical examiner's office has received little more than 100 cases. And usually in a normal year, the medical examiner's office will investigate 6,000 to 7,000 cases that are under their jurisdiction. So it's a very small percentage of what the medical examiner has taken in during this time. I'll let Joanna translate that really quickly.
La pregunta es que se ha doblado la capacidad en el médico forense. ¿Cuánto de ese porcentaje viene siendo por el calor? ¿Cuántas son por muertes repentinas? ¿O cuál es el porcentaje a qué se debe? Bueno, 100 casos que se han al momento relacionado con COVID-19 han pasado por la oficina del médico forense, pero estas 100 muertes han sido desde enero hasta la fecha. Así que es muy limitado el número de muertes por COVID-19. El resto de los porcentajes no se tienen aquí a la mano, no se pueden ofrecer.
Mark, thank you so much for the question. Chad, who else do we have?
Vaughn Hilliard has our next question.
Sure.
Vaughn, your microphone is self-muted. If you'll unmute it, we can hear you.
Hey there, team. Thank you guys very much.
Sure, Vaughn.
I think I'll just say it. I think for a lot of us, the last 6 days have been very confusing on this storyline and kind of what got us here to this moment. And I'm trying to just clarify here because you guys said you expect these numbers to rise over the next 2 or 3 weeks. At the same time, you said that there's very few COVID deaths here among these bodies you're accounting for. At the same time, I think what I heard was that there are now 10 additional coolers that have been ordered here. And you suggested that there could be a clogging by the funeral homes, which is could be a reason for the mounting number of numbers potentially. But is that actually the case right now? And it comes down to also who made this decision to order these extra coolers. And I think part of the other thing was it seemed like there was some pushback towards some of our reporting on the expanded coolers because we've done this before and this is normal during the summer times. How many times, just even like over the last 10 years, have extra coolers been ordered? And I think for all of us, just trying to gain a picture as to why we're suddenly accounting for 293 bodies now. When we hear that in the height of COVID, it's hard not to make that match up with the rise of the pandemic here at the same time. It seems like what's being suggested to us is that it's not actually that significant of an impact and that we shouldn't be paying too much attention to this.
Well, I think you should be paying attention to this. So I think you've all asked very good questions over the last 5 or 6 days about what our capacity is, and this isn't and Vaughn, to your point, this isn't something we talk about this occasionally over the course of the summer every year because we do see more heat-related deaths every single summer, and those deaths are usually. A lot of those come to the medical examiner's office. So we, again, have exceeded the 150 internal capacity a number of times over the years. But to answer your question, we have never ordered portable coolers in the last 10 years. I was able to confirm that this week. And so we haven't had to do that in the past. Everything you've asked really goes back to being prepared for a system-wide crunch or a clog. If the funeral homes fill up and we have to keep bodies in our coolers for longer periods of time after they have been investigated and it's been resolved, but we're not able to get them to a funeral home so the family can take care of those services and take advantage of those funeral home services, then as Rob said and as Marcy has explained, we have to be prepared for that. So yes, while some of these while most of the bodies that are coming into the medical examiner's office are not COVID-related deaths, we still have to be prepared if COVID-related deaths are filling up the system in another way, like the bodies that are coming from hospitals to funeral homes. So this is all a symbiotic relationship that has to be recognized and prepared for, and we're doing our part to prepare for that. So I hope you're not under the impression that we're not willing to talk about this or not able to talk about this. I certainly don't want to pretend that this is normal either. This is not normal, what we're dealing with right now. This is the reality during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is, I don't want to say it's unprecedented, but it's certainly a new thing for us to order coolers just in case we exceed that 209 internal capacity. And Chad, if you can open up Vaughn's mic again. Vaughn, does that answer your question? Or your multiple questions?
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. I'll let.
And just to be clear, just the one clarification line was.
Sure.
Have you guys? Has there been a clogging because funeral homes have been unable? Is that something that has taken place yet, or is that a fear of what could happen over the next days or weeks?
Yeah, so Marcy said that, again, this is, I don't want to say it's anecdotal information because there are 87 funeral homes, as I understand it, in Maricopa County. Again, they don't report up their numbers or their capacities to Maricopa County, or at least they're not required to. And but by making those phone calls, reaching out to those partners that are part of this system, sorry, I bumped the mic there, that are part of this system, they were able to determine some of them are at capacity. And so we know there are strains on the system right now. And again, going back to being prepared and being ready just in case we have to keep bodies longer before they can be reach that disposition phase at a funeral home, that's what we're prepared for right now. Thanks for the question, Vaughn. Joanna will translate that long answer.
Bueno, la pregunta consiste en varias partes, que en los últimos 6 días han sido un poco confusos porque vemos que más muertes están surgiendo por COVID-19, que también se han traído más refrigeradores para poder guardar cuerpos. Sin embargo, las muertes que hemos estado viendo en el médico forense no son por COVID-19. Entonces, ¿cuál es el balance ahí? Bueno, lo que sucede es que en esta temporada se ven más muertes por la época del calor. Es lo que ve el médico forense. Cuando estamos viendo más muertes por el calor o por otra índole que se tiene que investigar, que no son relacionadas a COVID-19, lo que ocasiona es que la capacidad se está llenando. Entonces se han traído como una forma de proactiva tener los refrigeradores listos, por en caso de que las casas funerarias, que algunas están llenas o algunas están llenando, no recojan a esos cuerpos a tiempo, tener lugar donde poder poner a estos cuerpos. Sabemos que hay 87 casas funerarias en el condado Maricopa y se han hecho llamadas de salud pública para ver su capacidad y también para que ellos puedan recoger a los cuerpos que se les han hecho acuerdos para que recojan. Si ellos están llenos, se les hace difícil recogerlos también del médico forense. Entonces hay que estar preparados con ese tipo de refrigeradores en caso de que se tengan que utilizar.
Thank you, Vaughn, for the question. Chad, do we have somebody else for the question?
We do. Jessica has a follow-up question. Jessica, we can hear you now.
Thank you. Can the medical examiner's office accept bodies from hospitals if after these additional coolers are open, there is additional space and a hospital hits their capacity? Is there a relationship like that, and has that been discussed as a possibility?
I think Rob can expand on that a little bit more, but I think all things have been discussed at one point or another for the planning purposes for Unified Command. So, and then that's part of being prepared, and Rob can expand a little bit more on what our role is.
Right. So to clarify from an earlier question, there's 14 coolers that we will eventually have in place by the end of the week next week. And part of that reason is to have more than we need in case there's mechanical breakdowns, et cetera. So that's also part of prudent, responsible planning. As for your question, theoretically, could we take additional decedents and store them for hospitals if there is a complete overflow of the system elsewhere? Certainly that is a possibility, and we are planning for that possibility as well, should that become necessary. Although I would like to stress that at the moment that isn't necessary, and really our focus is on preservation of the system as a whole, to make sure that all major 3 parts of the system, the hospitals, the funeral homes, and the Office of the Medical Examiner, all are functioning smoothly and are able to take decedents in and get them all the way to the end for final disposition. That's our focus. If we can keep the system running and running the way it's supposed to and functioning, that's the best of all alternatives. However, if there is a hiccup anywhere along in the process, we are planning for what we can do to fill in those gaps and make sure that everything is being taken care of.
La pregunta es, ¿puede el médico forense recibir cuerpos de los hospitales si los hospitales están llenando? Vamos a aclarar que para la próxima semana se espera tener 14 refrigeradores más para poder guardar algunos cuerpos. Sin embargo, estos no se van a utilizar todos al mismo tiempo. Eso, si se llega a descomponer uno, los otros están disponibles. También se ha hablado de la posibilidad que si los hospitales estuvieran llenos, entonces sí pudiéramos recibir cuerpos en el médico forense. Pero la planeación es para que tanto hospitales como casas funerarias y el médico forense trabajen sin tener que interrumpir sus actividades o estar llenos, porque eso viene a ser un efecto dominó parando otras operaciones. Entonces el trabajo es que se haga sin tener contratiempos de ninguna índole. Pero si llegara a haber, están los refrigeradores listos para poder recibir a estos cuerpos.
Thank you, Jessica, for the question. Chad, do we have somebody else with a follow-up?
That was our final question.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We appreciate you allowing us to clarify a number of things. Certainly, understand this is a difficult thing, and there's and certainly this is I guess a difficult topic to talk about as well, but it is a reality during the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe our planning will pay off in the long run, and hopefully we don't have to use this expanded capacity, but we're certainly prepared to do so. So we appreciate you being with us today. Thank you for all the reporters on the webinar. Thank you for your good questions, and thank you for those of us from the public joining us via YouTube or Facebook. We always appreciate your time and your interest in what is going on in the community during this pandemic and how Maricopa County is reacting to this and trying to take care of the community through our efforts. So we appreciate it. We will see you next time.